He never thought he would receive an invitation like this. It arrived late in the evening through a short email from the company's assistant, inviting him to the CEO's private celebration at a luxury venue in the city. At first, he believed it must be a mistake. He was not a manager, not a team leader, and not someone people usually noticed. He worked quietly, finished his tasks on time, and went home without drawing attention. For several minutes, he stared at the screen, wondering why his name was on the list. The party was known to be exclusive, attended only by executives, investors, and people with impressive titles. He almost deleted the email, thinking it was sent to the wrong person. But when he checked again, his name was clearly written. There was no mistake. On the day of the party, doubt followed him from the moment he woke up. He stood in front of his small mirror, adjusting his only formal suit. It was clean and well-pressed, but simple and slightly old. He knew it could not compare to the expensive clothes others would wear. Still, he told himself that an invitation was an invitation, and refusing without reason would look worse. The venue was a grand hotel known for hosting high-level events. Bright lights decorated the entrance, and luxury cars lined the street. As he stepped inside, the sound of laughter and soft music filled the air. People stood in groups, holding glasses, talking confidently about business deals and achievements. The smell of expensive perfume and polished wood made him feel even more out of place. He paused near the entrance, unsure where to stand or what to do next. Everyone around him seemed to belong there. Their confident posture and easy smiles made him feel small. He reminded himself that he worked for the same company, even if his role was different. Still, the feeling of being watched followed him as he walked slowly into the room. A waiter offered him a drink, and he politely declined, not wanting to risk spilling anything or feeling uncomfortable. He chose a quiet corner instead, observing the room. He noticed how naturally others spoke to each other, as if they had known one another for years. Some laughed loudly, others spoke with authority. He listened without interrupting, afraid his words might sound wrong or unnecessary. Deep inside, he questioned why he had come at all. He had spent most of his life staying invisible, believing that hard work was enough. He was not used to events like this, not used to being surrounded by people who measured worth by appearance and status. Yet something kept him there, a quiet voice telling him that leaving early would feel like admitting defeat. As the evening continued, more guests arrived, and the room grew louder. He noticed glances directed at him, quick looks followed by whispers. He tried not to imagine what they were saying, focusing instead on his breathing. He reminded himself that he had earned his place at the company through effort, not connections. The piano in the corner of the room caught his attention for a brief moment. It stood untouched, polished, and elegant. He looked away quickly, pushing away thoughts he did not want to revisit. This night was not about the past. He told himself it was just a party, nothing more. Still, as he stood there holding his invitation card in his pocket, he felt that something important was about to happen. He did not know what it was or how it would change him, but deep down, he sensed that accepting this invitation was the first step into a moment that would test him in ways he never expected. The moment he stepped deeper into the room, he could feel the change in the air. Conversations continued, but their tone shifted slightly, as if his presence had created a small disturbance. People looked at him for a second longer than normal, then quickly turned back to their groups, pretending nothing was unusual. He tried to ignore it and walked slowly across the hall, holding his posture straight even though his chest felt tight. His shoes were clean but modest, his suit neat but ordinary. In a place filled with tailored jackets, designer watches, and confident laughter, he stood out without trying to, and standing out in the wrong way often invited judgment. A group near the center of the room glanced at him openly. One man raised his eyebrow. Another leaned closer to whisper something into his friend's ear. Their soft laughter followed immediately. It was not loud enough to be rude, but clear enough to be understood. He pretended not to notice, fixing his gaze on a painting hanging on the wall. As he moved closer to the refreshment table, he overheard fragments of conversation. Questions spoken quietly but with sharp meaning. Who invited him? Does he even work here? Maybe he came with someone important. The words were not said to his face, but they reached him anyway. Each one landed like a small weight on his shoulders. He poured himself a glass of water, hands steady despite the noise in his mind. He reminded himself that he had done nothing wrong. An invitation was not something he had taken. It was something he had been given. Still, the feeling of being measured followed him everywhere he stood. Nearby, two women glanced at his suit and exchanged a look. One smiled politely when their eyes met, but the smile disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was the kind of smile people give when they are being kind out of habit, not respect. He nodded slightly and looked away. He chose another quiet spot near the edge of the room, hoping to blend into the background. But even there, the whispers continued. Some guests assumed he was a junior employee. Others thought he might be security or support staff who wandered in by mistake. No one asked him directly. They preferred guessing. It was easier that way. He listened as people spoke proudly about promotions, overseas trips, and expensive hobbies. Their words were filled with confidence and comfort. He felt like a guest in a world that spoke a different language. His own achievements felt small in comparison, even though he knew how much effort they had required. At one point, a man bumped into him lightly and barely apologized. Giving him a quick look from head to toe, the message was clear without words. "You are not important." He stepped aside immediately, not wanting to cause trouble or draw attention. Inside, memories stirred, moments from his life when he had felt the same invisible pressure. School events where he stayed quiet, gatherings where he felt judged before being known. He had learned long ago how to stay calm in such moments, how to lower his voice, how to shrink himself to avoid conflict. Yet tonight felt different. The silence around him was louder than any insult. The smiles that never reached people's eyes. The conversations that paused when he came close. The way some guests looked through him as if he were furniture. It all added up. He wondered if leaving early would be the better choice. No one would stop him, no one would even notice. He imagined the relief of stepping outside into the cool air, away from the unspoken judgments. But then he looked around again and stayed. He stayed because walking away would mean accepting their assumptions. It would mean agreeing that he did not belong, so he remained quiet, observant, and patient, unaware that these silent judgments were slowly leading everyone toward a moment none of them could have predicted. Long before he stood in that shining hall, his life had followed a very different path, one that few people at the party could ever imagine. While others spoke proudly about success and comfort, his past was filled with quiet struggle, long nights, and choices made out of necessity rather than desire. He grew up in a modest home where dreams were allowed but rarely supported by money. His family believed in hard work above everything else. From a young age, he learned that survival came before passion. Yet music entered his life early, almost by accident. An old piano sat in a community center near his house, its keys worn and uneven. That piano became his escape. As a teenager, he spent hours practicing alone, teaching himself through repetition and patience. He could not afford lessons, so he listened carefully, watched others, and learned by making mistakes. Music gave him a voice when words failed. It helped him forget the noise of everyday worries. Even when life felt heavy, the piano made him feel light. For a brief time, it seemed like music might become his future. A local teacher noticed his talent and encouraged him. He was told he had potential, something rare and special. Those words stayed with him for years, fueling quiet hope. But hope alone could not pay bills or support a family. When his father fell ill, everything changed. Medical costs grew quickly, and the household income disappeared almost overnight. Dreams were pushed aside without discussion. He took whatever work he could find, promising himself that the sacrifice was temporary. The piano was left behind, covered and forgotten. Life became about responsibility, not passion. He worked long hours, moved from one job to another, always choosing stability over interest. Music slowly faded into memory, becoming something painful to think about. He avoided it because remembering what he gave up hurt too much. Even after joining the company where the CEO worked, he never spoke about his past. There was no reason to. He believed that his value came from reliability, not talent. He completed his work quietly, avoided attention, and stayed grateful for steady income. Recognition was never something he expected. At times, when he was alone, he would imagine the sound of piano keys under his fingers. He remembered the feeling of control and expression, how each note told a story without words. But those moments were quickly pushed away. He had trained himself not to look back. Standing at the party now, surrounded by people who measured success in visible ways, those old memories returned unexpectedly. The soft background music, the polished floor, and the untouched piano nearby stirred something deep inside him. He felt a strange mix of sadness and calm. No one there knew how many dreams he had buried to survive. They saw only what was in front of them. A quiet man in a simple suit. They did not see the discipline, the years of practice, the silent strength built through loss, and he did not feel the need to explain. Instead, he stood quietly, carrying the weight of his past with dignity. He had learned that life does not reward every sacrifice immediately. Some rewards come later, in unexpected moments. He did not know it yet, but everything he had endured was slowly leading him toward such a moment. As he looked around the room again, he realized something important. The past he tried so hard to forget was not gone. It was still a part of him, waiting patiently, and soon, without warning, that forgotten part of his life would step forward and speak louder than words ever could. The moment that hurt the most did not come loudly or suddenly. It arrived quietly, wrapped in smiles and careless jokes. He was standing near the edge of the room when a small group nearby began to notice him more openly. Their eyes moved from his shoes to his suit, then to his face, as if examining something unfamiliar. One of them laughed softly and said something under his breath. Another leaned closer and replied with a grin. They did not bother lowering their voices enough. They assumed he was not important enough to be offended. The laughter that followed was light, but it carried sharp meaning. He shifted his weight and looked away, pretending to check his phone. Even though there were no new messages. He had learned long ago that reacting only made things worse. Silence was safer. But inside, his stomach tightened, and his hands felt cold. Someone pointed toward the piano in the corner, its polished surface reflecting the warm lights above. A man joked that the piano probably cost more than some people's yearly salary. Another added that it was wasted in a room like this. Their eyes briefly flicked toward him as they laughed again. The message was clear. He was the joke, the quiet one who did not fit the picture, the one they could safely mock without consequences. He felt his face grow warm, but he kept his expression calm. He refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. A woman from the group looked at him and smiled, but it was not a kind smile. It was the type of smile that hides judgment behind politeness. She asked casually if he enjoyed parties like this. Her tone suggested the answer did not matter. He nodded slightly and said very little. Another guest chimed in, asking where he worked. When he answered honestly, their interest faded almost instantly. The conversation shifted away from him as if he had already served his purpose. He became invisible again, but not before the damage was done. The laughter echoed in his mind, not because it was loud, but because it reminded him of other moments in his life. Times when people underestimated him. Times when he stayed silent to avoid conflict. He had always believed that patience was strength, but moments like this tested that belief. He stepped closer to the piano without realizing it, drawn by something familiar. His fingers twitched slightly at his side. A habit he had not noticed in years. For a second, he imagined touching the keys, but the thought scared him. This was not the place, not the time. Behind him, the group continued talking. Their jokes became bolder. Someone said that not everyone deserved to be invited into rooms like this. Another laughed and agreed, saying that some people should stay where they belonged. They did not use his name, they did not need to. His chest felt tight, and for the first time that evening, he considered leaving immediately. He imagined walking out quietly, no goodbyes, no explanations, just disappearing the way he always did. The idea brought a strange sense of relief. But then he remembered why he came. He had not forced his way into this room. He had been invited. That thought grounded him. He straightened his shoulders slightly and stayed where he was. Even if no one respected him, he would respect himself. The humiliation did not break him, but it changed something inside him. It reminded him that silence can protect, but it can also hide truth. He did not know what would happen next. He did not know that this moment of quiet mockery was setting the stage for something far greater. As the laughter faded and the music softened, he stood there, calm on the outside, steady on the inside, unaware that the very thing they used to mock him was about to become the reason they would never forget him. The shift began when the CEO entered the room, not loudly, but with a calm presence that naturally drew attention. Conversations softened, laughter lowered, and people slowly turned their focus toward him. He was not someone who demanded respect, yet it followed him wherever he went. He moved through the crowd with ease, greeting guests by name, listening more than speaking. His eyes noticed details others missed, expressions, body language, the quiet spaces between groups. That was when he noticed the man standing alone near the piano. The CEO paused for a moment, watching from a distance. He saw how others spoke around the man but not to him. He noticed the polite distance, the subtle looks, the way laughter seemed to rise and fall whenever the man shifted his position. It was familiar. He had seen this kind of quiet exclusion many times before. As he continued greeting guests, someone joked nearby about the piano and who should be allowed to touch it. Laughter followed. But the CEO did not laugh. Instead, his eyes returned to the man in the simple suit, who stood calmly, hands relaxed, expression controlled. Curiosity replaced politeness. The CEO excused himself from the conversation he was in and walked slowly toward the piano. The room seemed to follow him without realizing it. People adjusted their posture, fixed their smiles, and straightened their jackets. He stopped beside the piano and rested his hand lightly on its polished surface. He asked casually if anyone there played. Several guests laughed it off. Some shook their heads. Others joked that they preferred listening rather than performing. The attention shifted again toward the piano. Then the CEO looked directly at the quiet man and asked him a simple question. "Do you play?" The question cut through the room like silence. Conversation stopped completely. A few people smiled, expecting embarrassment. Others waited, curious to see how the man would react. They assumed the question was a joke or a test meant to expose him. The man felt every eye turn toward him. His heart beat faster, but his face remained calm. For a brief second, old fear tried to rise, reminding him of everything he had left behind. But something in the CEO's tone was different. There was no mockery in it, only genuine interest. He hesitated, then answered honestly, "Yes, a little." The response surprised more than a few people. Some exchanged looks, others smiled again, expecting a short and awkward attempt. Someone whispered that this should be interesting, assuming it would end badly. The CEO nodded slowly, as if he had expected that answer. He stepped back slightly and gestured toward the piano. "Would you mind playing something for us?" The room froze. No one laughed this time. The moment felt heavier, charged with uncertainty. The man stood still, feeling the weight of the invitation. This was not a demand, not a trap, it was a choice. He looked at the piano, then back at the CEO. In that moment, years of silence pressed against his chest. Every sacrifice, every night he chose responsibility over passion. Every time he told himself that music no longer mattered. He could refuse, no one would blame him. He could smile politely and step away, returning to the safety of invisibility. But something deeper pushed back. A quiet strength he had forgotten reminded him that some moments come only once. He took a breath and nodded. The CEO smiled slightly and stepped aside, giving him space. The crowd parted without realizing it, making a clear path to the piano. As the man walked forward, the expressions around him shifted again. Curiosity replaced judgment. Anticipation replaced laughter. Even those who had mocked him earlier leaned in closer. The CEO watched carefully, not smiling, not speaking, simply observing. He sensed that this was more than entertainment. It was a moment of truth, and the room, without knowing why, felt that something important was about to unfold. The moment he sat down at the piano, the room seemed to hold its breath. The bench felt familiar beneath him, even though years had passed since he last touched an instrument like this. His fingers hovered above the keys, slightly stiff, not from fear, but from memory waking up after a long sleep. For a few seconds, he did nothing. Some guests exchanged looks, already preparing quiet smiles. Assuming the pause meant doubt, others leaned back, expecting a quick and forgettable performance. No one spoke, yet the silence grew heavy. He closed his eyes gently and placed his hands on the keys. The first note sounded soft, almost hesitant, but it was clear and clean. It traveled across the room and settled into the silence. The second note followed, then another, each one carried intention, not uncertainty. As the melody began to form, something changed. The casual expressions faded, conversations stopped completely. Even the soft background music from earlier seemed distant now. The sound coming from the piano was not rushed or careless. It was controlled, emotional, and deeply personal. His fingers moved with growing confidence, muscle memory returned, guiding him without thought. Years of practice flowed back into his hands. He no longer saw the crowd, the lights, or the polished floor. The room disappeared, leaving only him and the music. The melody told a story without words. It spoke of struggle, patience, loss, and quiet hope. Each note carried weight, yet nothing felt forced. The piano responded to his touch as if it had been waiting for him. Guests who had mocked him earlier now stood still, unsure how to react. Their smiles vanished, replaced by focus. Some lowered their glasses slowly, others leaned forward, afraid to miss a single sound. The room that once felt divided was now united by the music. The CEO remained standing near the piano, his expression unreadable. He listened closely, noticing not just the technical skill, but the emotion behind it. This was not someone showing off. This was someone remembering who they were. As the music grew stronger, so did the feeling in the room. The melody rose and fell naturally, never demanding attention, yet holding it completely. It was the kind of performance that made people reflect, reminding them of parts of themselves they had forgotten. The man's posture relaxed as he played, his shoulders lowered, his breathing steady. The tension that had followed him all evening slowly dissolved. For the first time that night, he felt whole. A few guests felt something tighten in their chest, though they could not explain why. Others felt embarrassment for their earlier thoughts. But no one dared interrupt. The music commanded respect without asking for it. As the final section approached, the melody softened again, returning to the gentle tone it began with. His fingers slowed, pressing each key with care. The last note lingered in the air long after his hands lifted. Silence followed, deep and complete. No one clapped immediately, not because they were unimpressed, but because they were stunned. It felt wrong to break the moment too quickly. He opened his eyes and looked down at the keys, his hands still resting quietly. He did not look at the crowd. He did not search for approval. The music had said everything he needed to say. Finally, someone exhaled, then another. Applause slowly began, hesitant at first, then growing stronger, filling the room. But he remained seated, calm and composed, unaware that in those few minutes, he had completely changed how everyone in that room saw him. The applause did not end quickly. It grew stronger, louder, and more sincere with each passing second. Some guests clapped out of surprise, others out of respect, and a few because they felt ashamed of what they had thought earlier. The sound filled the room in a way laughter never had. He stood up slowly from the piano bench, his movements calm and controlled. He did not bow or smile proudly. He simply stepped back, as if he had only done what was asked of him. That quiet confidence caught the attention of many more than the performance itself. People who had ignored him earlier now looked at him differently. Their eyes followed him, searching for something they had missed. The simple suit no longer seemed ordinary. His silence no longer looked like weakness. It looked like depth. A man who had laughed earlier avoided his gaze completely, pretending to be busy with his phone. Another whispered something to his friend, this time without laughter. A few guests nodded respectfully as he passed them, unsure what to say but aware that their assumptions had been wrong. Small conversations started again, but their tone had changed. Instead of jokes and judgment, there was curiosity. People asked each other who he was, where he learned to play like that, why they had never noticed him before. The room buzzed with new interest. Someone approached him and complimented his performance. He thanked them politely and said very little. He had no desire to explain himself. The music had already done that work for him. Words felt unnecessary. The CEO stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. A simple gesture, but one that carried weight. The room went quiet again. The CEO thanked him for sharing something so meaningful. His voice was calm, but his respect was clear. He nodded in return, feeling a strange mix of emotions. Relief, pride, and calm settled within him. Not because he had impressed anyone, but because he had finally allowed himself to be seen. People who once stood tall now seemed smaller, not in importance, but in certainty. Their confidence had been based on surface-level things, and those things suddenly felt fragile. They realized that talent, depth, and experience could exist quietly, unnoticed. A few guests apologized indirectly, making polite comments about first impressions and surprises. He listened without judgment, accepting their words without holding on to the past. He understood that people often judged what they did not understand. As the evening continued, invitations to talk, to sit, to join conversations came from all directions. He accepted some and declined others, choosing carefully where to spend his energy. For the first time, the room felt open instead of closed. He noticed how the piano now stood behind him. No longer a symbol of mockery, but of truth. It had shifted the balance of the room, reminding everyone that worth could not always be measured by titles or clothes. The CEO later spoke to him privately, not as a superior, but as someone genuinely interested. He asked about his background, his journey, and his future. He listened closely, without interrupting, without assumptions. When the conversation ended, the man felt lighter than he had all evening. He realized that respect gained through honesty and skill felt different from attention gained through status. It felt real. As he looked around the room one last time, he saw understanding in places where judgment once lived. He had not raised his voice, defended himself, or argued. He had simply been himself, and in doing so, he had changed the atmosphere completely, not just for himself, but for everyone who had learned, in that quiet moment, that true value often reveals itself when no one is expecting it. The night slowly began to wind down. Guests started saying their goodbyes, voices softer now, movements less hurried. The energy in the room was different from when the evening began, calmer, more thoughtful, as if something important had settled quietly into everyone's mind. He stood near the exit for a moment, holding his coat, watching people leave. Some nodded at him respectfully, others smiled. A few even stopped to shake his hand. These were the same people who had once looked past him. The change felt unreal, yet he remained grounded. The CEO approached him once more, this time without an audience. His tone was warm and sincere. He thanked him again, not just for the music, but for the reminder it gave everyone in the room. He spoke about how talent often hides behind silence, and how easy it is to overlook people who do not demand attention. They talked briefly about work, about life, and about choices. The CEO listened closely, as if every word mattered before they parted. He offered him an opportunity, not framed as a reward, but as recognition, a chance to step into a role where his discipline, patience, and depth could truly be valued. He did not answer immediately. He asked for time to think. The CEO respected that and smiled, telling him that the door would remain open. That simple respect meant more than any promise. As he stepped outside into the cool night air, the noise of the city felt distant, the lights reflected on the street, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself to breathe deeply. The weight he had carried for years felt lighter. He walked slowly, replaying the night in his mind, the mockery, the silence, the music, and the shift. It all felt like a reminder rather than a victory. A reminder that the parts of himself he once buried were never truly gone. He thought about the piano, about the countless hours he spent practicing alone, believing those moments had been wasted. Now he understood that nothing had been lost. Everything had been waiting for the right time. At home, he placed his coat down carefully and sat in the quiet of his small room. The silence did not feel empty. It felt full. He smiled faintly, not out of pride, but peace. He knew life would not suddenly become perfect. There would still be challenges, responsibilities, and moments of doubt. But something inside him had shifted permanently. He no longer felt invisible to himself. The next morning, he returned to work as usual, dressed the same, walking the same halls, but people noticed him differently. Some greeted him with new respect. Others looked at him with curiosity. He remained unchanged in his behavior, letting actions speak instead of words. He did not tell his story loudly. He did not correct assumptions. He had learned that real validation does not need explanation. It arrives quietly and stays. In the days that followed, he made a decision. He would no longer hide the parts of himself that mattered, not for attention, but for honesty. He began playing music again in his own time, not for applause, but for joy. The night of the CEO's party became a memory he carried with gratitude, not because he proved others wrong, but because he proved himself right, that patience has power, that silence has depth, and that true worth reveals itself when the moment is ready. And though no one would mock him again, he no longer feared it, because he finally understood that the strongest form of respect comes from knowing who you are and never needing to explain it.